This is AM Agenda. With me now, the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Steve Ciobo, and Labor frontbencher, the Shadow Employment Minister, Brendan O'Connor. Steve Ciobo, your thoughts on this story this morning that we broke a bit earlier. The Prime Minister did seek a guarantee from Julie Bishop that she would not challenge him, challenge the leadership. That was on Sunday, late on Sunday. That guarantee, that commitment was not given. Your reaction to that story this morning?
Well, look, Kieran, with these sorts of things, there's a lot of speculation and gossip that flies around. Can I tell you, quite seriously, this type of rubbish does not draw any focus from me at all. More importantly, across the government, our focus absolutely steadfast remains upon the job that we were elected to do. We were elected to arrest Labor's massive increase in debt. We're doing that. We're elected to make sure that we create better economic conditions to help drive jobs, and that's what we're focused on. And of course, yesterday the Prime Minister outlined what will be our very strong focus upon making sure Australian families are in a stronger position going forward. And we'll be outlining more detail on that in due course.
You described it as rubbish, but isn't it important that whether or not the Prime Minister is concerned about the loyalty of his deputy and seeks a guarantee from her that she will not challenge?
Well, you asked me if it's important, and my answer to that is a very straightforward no, it's not important. It's not important to the Australian people. It's not important to their lives. It's not important to whether or not, as a government, we're doing and taking the decisions that are important to them. Because what is important to the Australian people, job security, their own physical security in terms of terrorism. They want to know that the economy is under control, and they want to know that we're not going to continue following Labor's debt trajectory, which actually sees us borrowing money from future generations of Australians who'll have to repay all the debt that the Labor Party left behind with their unsustainable spending. That's what's important.
But I'll just ask you one more on this issue, because before we go on, if the Prime Minister is worried about or has concerns about seeking a guarantee from his deputy for a reassurance of her loyalty, why is that not of interest to the Australian people who is or is not, who might be considered a replacement to the Prime Minister? How is that not a point of interest?
Well, the fact is that Julie Bishop, in public comments, has said she supports the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister made it clear yesterday that he understood that he has Julie's support. These issues, although I understand why they're fascinating and interesting for people like yourself, Kieran, and others in the press gallery, and I'm not even going to suggest that there isn't some level of interest, but what I'm saying to you is that these issues are not important to the Australian people. What's important to Australians are the future of this country, whether Aussie kids will have a better tomorrow than they did today, whether we've got and are able to afford to continue to provide quality healthcare, quality education, making it easier for people to have jobs and to secure jobs. That's what's important, and that's what I and the government are focused upon.
Brendan O'Connor, to you on those comments from Steve Ciobo and the critique yesterday as put by Tony Abbott, who put in one of his stronger performances in recent times. It was quite a forceful Prime Minister, certainly when he picked up some of the criticisms, for example, of the Victorian government, mocking them for saying you're going to spend more than $1 billion on a road that's not going to be built. The PM showing some signs of his former performance as a very effective opposition leader there.
Well, he's a very desperate man at this point, and I think the question that you've asked Stephen and others, including Andrew Laming, is a very important one, Kieran. If Julie Bishop cannot rule out that she won't challenge the Prime Minister, she has to resign. I mean, she has two options. She either unequivocally says that she will not challenge the Prime Minister, or she must resign as his deputy. Otherwise, she would be showing a gross disloyalty. So that's why it's such a vital question, however much Andrew Laming and Steve Ciobo and others like to pretend it's not. It's very important that a deputy makes that clear to the Australian public as to whether they're going to get rid of the current Prime Minister. So that's something for her to deal with. Insofar as the speech yesterday, this was a speech directed to the party room, not to all Australians. This was about securing one job, that of the Prime Minister's, not of the jobs that are required for 800,000 Australians out of work. So no, I'm not particularly impressed with the efforts of the Prime Minister. This is a chaotic and dysfunctional government, and clearly there's a lack of faith, not only between the government and the Australian people, but now there's a complete lack of faith and trust within the ranks of senior members of this government.
Steve Ciobo, I want to ask you about Andrew Laming, your colleague from Queensland, who is going to move a private members bill to have Knights and Dames gone altogether. That's hardly helpful. And I just want to recap a little and pick up on something Brendan O'Connor said in terms of the response from Julie Bishop. Should there be a guarantee from her and Malcolm Turnbull that they won't challenge?
Well, look, in terms of Andrew Laming, I mean, Andrew obviously has a bit of a bee in his bonnet about this. He's taken the view that he doesn't support those additional honours despite reforms that were made. You know, Kieran, honestly, I'm quite relaxed about these things. We have private members' bills that come before the Parliament on a regular basis. The fact we'll have another private members' bill on this is not a tall order issue. It is simply a reflection of his priorities and what he would like to do from the backbench as a member of the government. You know, I'm not getting too worked up about it.
And what about my second question to you relating to Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop? Should they give a public commitment that they won't challenge, or if they don't, is Brendan O'Connor's assessment accurate that their positions are untenable?
Well, I certainly don't think that Labor Party commentary on the Liberal Party is ever accurate. It's only ever designed to do one thing, and that is to cause as many problems for the government as possible. That's Brendan's job. That's the opposition's job.
So that's to
be expected. Look, in terms of Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop, they have made it crystal clear that they support the Prime Minister, and I'm making it crystal clear this morning, Kieran, that as a government we remain focused on what's important to the Australian people, and this type of chatter is simply not important to the Australian people.
Brendan O'Connor, back to you in terms of the PM's speech yesterday, and gradually he's determined to push through this. He's not going to be resigning or stepping down, that's for sure. He was resolute yesterday that he will remain leader and eventually put the blowtorch on the Labor Party. Do you accept that this is a long electoral cycle we're talking about, and Labor's going to have to step up very, very shortly if it's going to pass that sort of scrutiny, and not just from the Prime Minister but more broadly?
Well, Labor will focus on the issues and allow the government to continue to focus on itself. We're concerned that, of course, that there is quality health care. We want to make sure that Medicare is preserved, that universal health care in this country is maintained. We do, of course, we're also concerned about the dangers of moving higher education out of the reach of ordinary Australians. We're also concerned about the cuts to the rate of pension. So we'll continue our focus on those things that matter, looking at ways that, while in opposition, we can create policies that create the opportunities for employment growth and economic growth, and allow the government to do what it does currently. I mean, the only blowtorch that's currently applied, Kieran, is that of Julie Bishop, who refuses to say she won't challenge the Prime Minister, and even the backbench, repudiating the Prime Minister's speech immediately after it's given by saying they're about to move a private members bill to repeal the Knights and Dames honours that were introduced unilaterally by the Prime Minister.
Were you satisfied with the Prime Minister's speech yesterday that he is going to be more conciliatory? Because he's promised it before, hasn't he, Steve Ciobo?
Look, I think that what we saw yesterday was the Prime Minister outline a clear vision about what the government's priorities will be in 2015. He also outlined, of course, the government's very strong record of achievement since we were elected around about 18 months ago or just under. As a government, we continue to remain focused on delivering in full our commitment to the Australian people about restoring the budget back to a sustainable position. You know, I just heard just then Brendan O'Connor outline Labor's priorities. And you know what? On the face of it, you'd have to say, well, who could disagree with those priorities? But the fundamental problem is this, Kieran. The fundamental problem is what Brendan just spoke of is literally going to cost tens of billions of dollars of more money that Labor does not have, money that Labor is going to have to borrow from overseas, and it is simply going to mean that Labor continues the exact same trajectory that Labor had when they were last in power, which is to borrow and spend and borrow and spend, and the only way that Labor can even come close to starting to get that spending under control is if they increase taxes. So Labor's, and you can hear it from Brendan's own words, Labor's approach going forward is to tax more, to borrow more and to spend more.
Yeah, well, just finally, Steve, to you, only 30 seconds left, but you've got to win that argument. And as was seen in your state at the weekend, the LNP, the Liberal and National parties, far from doing that at the moment. Certainly, that result at the weekend suggested you're failing in a big way.
Well, look, you know, the thing about politics, Kieran, there's always a challenge. There's always difficulties. It's not a straightforward business. But ultimately, we want to bring the Australian people on the journey. And, you know, hopefully I'm doing my little bit this morning.
Steve Ciobo, thanks for
what happened to
doing
Adam
your little
Giles?
bit. Appreciate it. And Brendan O'Connor, we're out of time, fellas. Thank you very much for that. We're going to cover that story of Adam Giles after the break. Stay with us here on AM Agenda.